And, just a little bit on myself, I'm tired of being the only chick at stuff. So we bring color to the industry with our different colored dresses instead of gray and black suits.
The beautiful young lady on the screen there is Rene Banglesdorf, who's a good friend. She has an organization called Charlie Bravo Aviation. She's also extremely involved with IWA, International Association of Women in Aviation. And she's here to tell us what's going on in her life and have some new things for you. So, Renee, I forgot to say this. Anybody that has a question, make sure that you look in the text box and you send it to us, and we'll get those questions to Renee. And we encourage you to do that right while right while the question hits your mind. Don't wait to the end hoping for a Q&A period, even though we'll give you lots of chances. So, Renee, it's all yours.
Tom, thank you so much for having me today. And I'm glad that you wore your Hawaiian shirt because it is cloudy and gray in Texas today. We're expecting some rain this afternoon. So you're giving me some sunshine from California while we're having this interview today. I'm super excited to be here with you today and to talk about my soapbox topic, which is why we need more women in aviation. So thank you so much for humoring me with that today. And before I even go into any slides at all, I want to say thank you to you because I know that your staff is primarily female. And
It's
I think
100%
that,
female,
do we
not
have
just
gender
primarily.
issues to talk to you about here? Or
Yes, you do.
are you self-proclaiming as a woman today? Because I was giving you
Kind of. Well, I'm not part of my staff, so that's the way I think of it.
all right, your whole staff is female, and I appreciate that. I've met some of them. They're charming and delightful. They're working hard and they're making a difference. And I think that it's amazing to see what you've been able to do with them and with your team as you've grown over the years. And kudos to you on that.
Thanks a
So
lot.
we talked about me coming on and doing a webinar for you, talking about podcasts and some of the stuff that I'm seeing in aviation as I've been really involved in a number of organizations looking at the lack of women in the industry. And in fact, it's such an issue that the FAA is forming a Women in Aviation Advisory Board to look at this very topic. And so I want to get into why this is important. And, just a little bit on myself, I'm tired of being the only chick at stuff. So we bring color to the industry with our different colored dresses instead of gray and black suits. But I think that we bring a lot of other things to the industry as well. And I want to talk about those over the next few minutes. So why women? In case you've been on Mars for the last 3 years, we have a pilot and a mechanic shortage coming. And the airlines are doing everything that they can to make sure that they're filling their pipelines, which is going to be a major detriment to general aviation if we don't start doing some of the same things. So more than half of the available labor force is female. So why are there only 6 or 8% women in executive roles in our industry? We're not tapping into the entire labor force. So we need to start looking at that. A recent Catalyst study showed that this is good for companies. Having gender equality is good for companies. The labor force is happier, the retention rates are higher, and the productivity is higher. We also see studies that show things like lower risk taking, lower insurance rates, and higher profitability because we have a balance of thought at the board table. And I heard this yesterday on a podcast that I was listening to. Gender equality is not expensive. Gender inequality is already costing you a lot, looking back at the retention rates, the productivity, and the happiness of your labor force. I love this news came out just last week that Best Buy, which is a company that probably most of you are familiar with, has finally achieved gender equality, so 50-50 on their board, 6 female board members, 6 male board members. And they talk about this, and they have been very purposeful about this. And there's a golden nugget in here that I want everybody to see. And they say in the second sentence, we are fully committed because if your executive team, your board, your management team, and your employees do not represent the customers and communities you are serving, you're going to miss executing your strategy. You're going to miss clients. And when I looked with WealthX at these numbers and with JetNet at these numbers a few years ago, I was like, I've heard stats that women drive 85% of the buying decisions in the world, and yet less than 5% of aircraft owners are women. So we're missing a huge audience of potential buyers as those who are influential in selling things around aviation. If we're not helping attract not just women employees and contributors to aviation, but also women consumers of general aviation, especially. So I want to challenge you with that. I think there's an opportunity there. Next, I'd like to talk a little bit about this, because this is a woman who's been on the board of Best Buy since 1999. And she said they didn't set out to achieve gender parity. They set out to bring in candidates who have the skill sets to support the future strategies of Best Buy. They insisted that the candidates were diverse, and therefore they were able to achieve diversity on the board. So I've been doing a podcast, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, for about 6 months now. And what I'm finding is 3 distinct things that companies need to do to make their company a good place to work for anyone who could contribute to their team. And what I find is that if you make your company a great place to work for women, you actually make it an attractive place to work for everyone. An increasing number of millennials are identifying that they choose a place to work based on the diversity at that workplace. Even if they're a man, a white middle class man, some of these younger people are looking at, are we inclusive and are we diverse at this place of work, or are we stuck in old ways? And that's challenging to us, who are not of the millennial generation or the Gen Z generation, to examine what we're doing and say, are we a good workplace fit for anyone who might be top talent that we want to attract? And these 3 things are communication. We need to say that diversity and inclusion are important, and we need to say why they are, because we think bigger and we explore all the options when we have a diverse workforce. And we communicate in verbal and nonverbal ways. So we need to be really careful about the way that we're communicating as leaders. Secondly is leadership. And as leaders, we need to be willing to mentor and sponsor people in our organization that we see promise in, whether they're female or male, of a different race, of a different educational background, and so that we can really help them to grow in their job. And we need to do that very consciously. And then, as I mentioned before, we need to insist on diverse candidates and then hire the best fit. I'm not saying hire the woman, I'm saying hire the best person. But what we tend to do as leaders, and I notice this especially in aviation, is we have a network of people that we think are great. And when I'm looking at my network of people, I'm going to look at the people that I've done business with before. And, most of them are men. So even I might look at, okay, here are 6 candidates that I might bring in sales, and all 6 of them are men. I need to make sure that I'm looking outside the box for some different candidates, and then hiring the person that's the best fit for my company. If we don't interview diverse candidates, we're not going to have any diversity in our company. So, and then the third thing is culture. And one of the most important things that I've learned, and I've interviewed people at lots of big companies at United and FedEx and Cox Automotive, and talk to them about the culture of their company that's inclusive and diverse. And what they've indicated isn't just, oh, we have a culture that is open. We sell, we have Fruit Loops in our break room for people if they want to eat that. They really talk about building community and allowing groups that are underrepresented to build community among themselves. Pratt and Whitney Canada does a phenomenal job of encouraging women in their organization. And they have a women's leadership event every year in October, November, December timeframe that encourages the women who are coming up within the organization, engineers and other women in professional careers in Pratt and Whitney, to get together and be encouraged and see role models within their organization that they can learn from and talk to. And I think that that's really important, especially in larger companies that we're able to build community. If you don't have a large company, you might encourage women in, you might encourage women in your organization to build community outside of your organization by joining a professional association or something like that. And I see Kelsey posted a question here for me. She said, as an office full of women, we have a hard time retaining men in our office. Any tips on this? And Kelsey, I would just say the same thing here. Maybe you should examine your communication and talk about why diversity and inclusion are important and what are any verbal or nonverbal communications that we're giving at our office that makes it difficult for men to feel included and valued in the organization. I think those things are really important, whatever we're looking at, because it's important to have ideas coming from different directions. And then kind of the last thing on culture is that we need to have zero tolerance for conscious or unconscious bias. And there are all sorts of podcasts out there about this and writings. I've read a few things on Harvard Business Review about unconscious bias. Definitely something to be mindful of as you are talking with people in the industry and definitely hiring. So moving on, here's where I get personal and get in everybody's business who's watching this that's a woman or an underrepresented party. It's not just the responsibility of the companies and leaders to make sure that we're diverse. It's women's responsibility too. And this is one thing that I've gotten really clear on the last few years. And there are a lot of information out there about this, that women need to be visible. They need to take risks and indicate that they want the job, and they need to be willing to stick their neck out there a little bit and take some chances. So we talked, here's one way that we can definitely make a difference. So in my work with the International Aviation Women's Association, we did a study with Korn Ferry, which is a large consulting firm. And in that soon to be released study, they talked about the glaring lack of women in aviation and aerospace. And what they found is that more than 50% of the women interviewed in their study indicated that they don't have a female role model in their workplace. And that's astounding to me. I can certainly say I don't have a female role model in my workplace because I'm the boss here, but I have lots of female role models outside of my workplace because I've sought those. But I also strive to be a female role model in my workplace. There are lots of women to be role models. Tom, you're here in this picture. You have to, it's like, where's Waldo? You have to find yourself. But this is the International Aviation Women's Association General Aviation Women's Leadership Forum that we put on last year. And you notice a few guys spread out here, but there are an awful lot of women, and every single one of these women is a role model and a leader in her workplace and in the industry. So there are plenty to choose from if you need a role model. I can certainly introduce you to them. Some of these women have been interviewed on my podcast, and you can find them and reach out to them. They're anxious to be role models to other women, and I think that's something that we all need to take part in. So moving on, this is what my opinion is, and I've given a bunch of different things that we can talk about here, but We need to be willing to mentor others. We need to ask to be considered for a panel or a speaking slot. And that's an important thing to do. I did that for years. I would call NAFA, I would make comments at the JetNet forum or at MBAA and indicate, hey, I'm available to be a panelist or a speaker. We need to establish thought leadership by writing articles or blogs. Our blog is pretty well regarded now, but it started out with me just saying, okay, I'm going to throw something out there that I think I'm an expert on and see what happens with this. We need to engage in conversations on difficult professional topics. There are lots of forums out there where you can, especially AOPA has one, you can get in there and talk with other people and put your opinion out there. It helps you hone your opinion when you debate other people on professional topics. Apply for a promotion that you're not 100% qualified for. Men do this all the time. Women tend to say, oh, well, I don't have that one educational requirement, so I'm not going to apply for that job because I won't get it. And we need to apply anyway and say, hey, here's why I think I should get this, even though I don't have this one qualification. Volunteer. We have Girl Scout days. There are all sorts of different things that you can volunteer for and get in public about aviation. Publicly support other women in your field. I have friends who, when I published my book a couple weeks ago, reposted that on LinkedIn. That doesn't require going out too much on the limb, but it starts to celebrate other women in the field. Organize a happy hour or lunch with other women or serve on a nonprofit board. I've done a couple of other things that I'm pretty proud of. One is starting a podcast. Here's with Tom's wife, lovely wife, Julie. And Julie was on my podcast. I think that airs tomorrow, her episode of my podcast. If not tomorrow, then the next week. But I have a podcast. I've interviewed 28 different women in different industries. So motorsports, someone from the San Antonio Spurs, people in automotive and tech and aviation and aerospace. It's been really interesting hearing about all these women in male-dominated industries and what they're doing to empower others around them. And then the other thing I've done is write a book called Stand Up, How to Flourish When the Odds Are Stacked Against You. Definitely stacked against us as we are women in a very male-dominated industry. And it was interesting to write it standing on a plane, obviously, if you're just listening to this and can't see it. But it's been a long, hard fight to get to where I am. And I'm pretty honest about that in this book. Had some childhood things that were difficult, and then went from being a stay-at-home mom to being in the top 5% of aircraft brokers in the world. And there have been lots of skin knees and recoveries in that time. So I appreciate all of you listening to this. Would love to answer any questions you have. I know that Kelsey threw one in here for me. How can we connect business to business to share ideas on how to find and be mentors? That is a great question, Kelsey. And I've had to do that myself because I run a 6-person firm. And so most of the people that I work with are men. And one of the things that I did was start networking with other women at industry events. The International Aviation Women's Association is great for that. There's also in general aviation, Women in Corporate Aviation, WCA, WAI, which is primarily commercial aviation, Women in Aviation International. They cover the gamut, but it's primarily commercial aviation, get lots of scholarships. There's lots of networking available to be done at those. And they have cocktail receptions. WAI has local chapters. Just getting out into the community, the aviation community as a whole, is a great way to connect. And I think that it's perfectly acceptable to connect into LinkedIn groups or Facebook groups that are focused on those things. If you do a search, you can begin to find those. Another question that you had. Tom, did you have a question? One in this chat box.
No, go ahead and take all the rest of your questions, and then I'll tell you what I wanted to say.
Okay. So share some examples of inequality you faced in the industry and how you overcame them. You know, I've had a lot, and not so much now because I'm better known in my industry, but I had to overcome some things early on when I first became the CEO of Charlie Bravo, where I would walk into a cocktail reception at NBAA and people would look at me as I'm Kurt's wife. And so it wasn't that I really didn't feel recognized for my professional contributions, but that I was the wife of somebody. And it happened again to me a couple of weeks ago. I was out at a race. It was a NASCAR race at the Circuit of the Americas, and we had some business associates there. And one of the guys who I'm working with on a pretty big project introduced my husband and I, we were there together and we worked together, to his business partner. And the guy immediately turned to Kurt and started asking him questions about the business. And Kurt primarily does sales. So the questions would have been more appropriately directed at me as the person who runs the business and not at him. But he immediately assumed that Kurt was the principal and that I helped out, or that Eric had given me credit for being part of the company that I'm not a part of, which isn't the case at all. So at those times, I have to kind of bite my tongue and be gracious, but it's not something that necessarily always comes easy. And I have to take those things, learn not to take those things personally. It could be that he liked what Kurt was wearing and he didn't like what I was wearing. I don't know, but it's one of those things that you have to figure out. I'm not going to take that personally. I'm going to do what I do and stay in my lane and do the best job that I can do. And I'll be recognized for that by the people that I work with on a day-to-day basis in my business and outside of my business. I don't know if that didn't answer the question. If you could ask a follow-on question, that would be great. What is an opportunity that I have received because I stood up and fought for it? There have been a couple of things. I've received quite a bit of recognition in the industry because I've put myself out there. At the recent National Aircraft Finance Association event, there were 3 women who spoke on panels the entire day. There were probably 40 or 50 speakers, maybe 40 speakers for the whole day, 3 women. So that's something that I've earned a spot at that table. According to AMSTAT data on amount of deals that brokers did last year, my firm's in the top 5%. And so I've earned that spot and I've been recognized for that in that area. I've received several local awards in Texas by the Women's Chamber of Commerce and by the Austin Business Journal. And I've fought for those as well. And then I got a book contract to talk about my story as well. And that book came out earlier in the month. So those are rewards that I feel that I've gotten as part of being out there in the industry and standing up and not being silent, using my voice and using it not just for my own benefit really, but for the benefit of others. Because I've noticed, and I noticed this, I'll use Tom's wife, Julie, as an example. And we talked about this on the podcast that's coming out. I threw her into the deep end of the pool last year, asking her to be on a panel at a conference. And she felt pretty nervous about that. But what I did was show her that she has something valuable to offer when she wasn't confident in that, because she hadn't done it before. Not because she wasn't qualified, but just because she hadn't done it before. So that's super rewarding for me as well, to be on solid enough footing that I can begin to pull other women along and push them out of their comfort zone as well. How do I find people for my office? Honestly, I have, with one exception, I have the same team that I've had for 3.5 years, and I absolutely love my team. I did make one hire last year, and it's an absolutely hilarious story, so I'll share it with you. My husband is belongs to Muirfield Village Country Club. It's a golf club. It's a club in Columbus, Ohio. It's pretty prestigious. It's Jack Nicklaus's home club, and he was playing there in the member guest. And this young approached him, and he said, "Hey, Kurt, my career is over in hockey, and I would like to sell jets. I think that'd be a great job for me." And Kurt's like, "Well, great. Well, Rene makes those decisions. Can you send me your resume?" And he said, "Can you just look on Wikipedia? I don't really have a resume." So I look him up on Wikipedia. He's played professional hockey for 14 years, and his final professional career performance was in the Olympics in Korea last year. So James Wisniewski, or as people refer to him as Wiz, is on our business development team now. But I didn't find him, he found me. And that's often what happens in this business. What would I
So
say is
the
my,
question, oh, you're still answering the question. So
one more just popped up. What would I say is my biggest accomplishment? As most moms, I think, should say, the hardest thing we do is raise children to be contributing adults. And both of my kids do that. And I would say that raising my kids is my biggest accomplishment. Jake is 27 and works here in my office with me, and he and his lovely wife made me a grandma earlier this year. And my sunshine, Brooke, just turned 24, and she is in flight training in Vero Beach, Florida, flight safety. So both of my kids are in aviation and have chosen career paths in aviation. And they're just wonderful human beings. I think that is by far my biggest accomplishment. Okay, Tom, you're up.
okay, a couple of things, and this is for the audience in general. If you're a woman, you have and trying to get into aviation, you have the same problem that every company has. The number one problem you have in your life is obscurity. And you are responsible for coming out of obscurity. If you listen to Renee's story, she had to take responsibility herself for becoming very visible in this industry so people would recognize her. So nobody is going to reach down and just pick you out of a group and just, here you go, sunshine, and you get this, because it's up to you. You have to raise your hand. You have to do the things that maybe other people don't have to do. And if you don't do that, you're not committed. You have to get committed, because then your creativity and your willingness to take the actions that it take will follow. And the minute that you do that, people will start to notice you. Just recognize that whenever you don't get what you want, that your real problem was obscurity. The person that you wanted to give you something that you needed, or buy something you needed, or anything, it's obscurity, and you are responsible for that. So that's my challenge to any female. And then secondarily, I'll address the issue of why all of my employees are female, because they apply. The one thing that we did is, several years ago, we don't accept resumes from anybody. You have to send us a 60-second video to tell us what you're going to add to our company. And for some reason, primarily the only group of people that do that are women. So they get into the front door, they get into the interview process, and we have a very extensive testing process. We give IQ tests, we give aptitude tests, and we have personality profile tests that we use. But to get in the door, you have to be willing to take pictures of yourself, video, and establish. You have to sell me. You have to sell your prospective employer, whether it's a promotion or a brand new job. It's your job to do that, and be willing to do it. And everybody on this planet has a cell phone, so you can take videos. Those are the things that I wanted to say. And do what this lady
Tom,
says.
I'm going to challenge you a little bit on that first thing you said. And I don't think that you always get what you want by being visible. I think that you get farther if you're visible. But I think that each one of us, and maybe in this industry, women have it more than men, we all fail. We all get turned down. And, sometimes it's because there was a better candidate, and sometimes it's because there was an unconscious bias at the place that we were trying to go. But the important thing is that you do, when you try for something and you don't get it, that you assess that. Why didn't you get that? Was it because there was some sort of outside influence on that? Was it because the person who was promoted in that place was the son or daughter of a large shareholder or stakeholder in the organization? There are all sorts of reasons that things happen that we don't get what we want. It's important to stand up. It's important to be visible. It's important to ask for help, but it's also important to say, you know what? I risked, I failed, I learned, I can get back up again. So it's important
I was
to
just going
take
to use a sports
all of those
analogy.
things into consideration.
I was just going to use a sports analogy. You can't hit a home run if you don't swing the bat. So you've got to get on the team and get yourself into the game at whatever level you have to get into the game. And that's really what I'm talking about. It's your responsibility to become the successful person that you want to be. Uh, and it's I still think it's back to an obscurity problem. But you as an individual have to take total responsibility for everything that happens in your life. Things don't happen to you, they happen because of you. Now that may be a hard thing to accept, but just keep swinging the bat. You're eventually
I'm
going to
going to
get.
disagree. I'm going to disagree with you on that because
Oh,
there have
that
been
completely
things.
shocks me, Renee.
There have been things that have happened to me, and I'm going to say, sometimes I take ownership in some of those things, partial ownership in some of those things, and I talk about that in my book. But there are things that happen to you. I'll give an example that touched me dearly to a year and a half ago, and that's that hurricanes, especially Hurricane Harvey, happened in Texas. And there were families that I was working with, we were flying supplies into them. There were families who had water 8 feet up their house. That's something that happens to you. But everything that happens to you, you have a choice of what to do with it. And there was a family, and it's going to bring me to tears just talking about them. There was a pastor that I was working with at a church in Beaumont. The church was on high ground, and they were able to accept all the supplies that we were flying in and distribute them to people who had been displaced. And this man's name was Stephen, and his wife's name was Jenna Lee, and they're absolutely lovely people. They have 3 little boys. And as I was talking to him and we were going, exchanging text messages and phone calls, and things got a little crazy with people trying to take supplies that were coming off of airplanes, I was like, my gosh, this is crazy. I'm glad everything's okay with you. And he said, oh no, my house is under 8 feet. But he chose, like we choose, right? We choose when things happen to us, how we're going to respond to them. And his house being under 8 feet of water is something that he said, well, I can sit around and feel sorry for myself, or I can apply myself to doing something productive. And each one of those, that's far bigger than just being a woman in aviation, but it's what builds our character, right? What we choose to do with what has happened to us. And so I don't want to, some women have, and maybe some women who are listening have been sexually harassed at work. That's a very common in this industry and in other industries. I honestly don't know any woman who has not at least had something inappropriate said to her in a business context. I don't know anyone. And some of those things happen to us, but it's really how we respond to them is what makes us flourish when the odds are stacked against us. That's really what my book talks about. That's the first chapter.
So did you make it clear to everyone how to get copies of your book? Because I think you might have gone through that too fast.
I'm going to go
Because
back to that. So first of all, would love to have everyone go to my website, renebanglesdorf.com, and you can sign up, subscribe to my podcast there. You can also buy my book there. Or if you search on it, it's available on Amazon.com and Barnes and Noble and Books a Million, any place that you would buy books normally. My publisher has made it available on all of those websites. You can order it from my website as well.
can you get it on Audible?
It's not out on Audible yet. I think that's about a month away, but it is available on Kindle.
Okay, are you doing the audio on the Audible?
I am doing the audio, and I will throw in some extra tidbits of
Well
stuff.
done. That's the way to do it. I always want to hear the author's voice,
Well,
especially
I didn't even know this, but I guess some of the better authors who do this throw in like, oh my gosh, that was such a crazy story. Let me tell you what really happened in the Audible. That's bonus material for the book. So
absolutely.
there's just, an additional pressure there, I guess. I'm going to do it myself and see what else I can add.
I think you do it. You should. I love hearing it. I love talking to you. I love your enthusiasm, and I encourage you in every way that I possibly can to keep moving forward on all your goals.
Thank you. I need lots of other women to join me. So stand up, girls. Let's all stand together.
Awesome. So I guess there aren't any more questions. I'll continue to sit here and you can listen to Rene and I breathe for a little while to give you an opportunity to ask for another question. And if I don't hear anything within about another 30 seconds, we're going to end this podcast.
I did see one on here, and it says, what are my goals right now? I mentioned it, I alluded to it a little bit earlier. There is in the FAA reauthorization, the Senate provided for a Women in Aviation Advisory Board on the FAA. And that advisory board will be tasked with figuring out how we can engage more young people, especially young women, in aviation and aerospace in the United States, and their initiatives in other countries around the world. I would love to be on that board. That topic is very near and dear to my heart, especially with
What's
a young.
stopping you?
What's stopping me?
Yeah.
Well, there's this thing called the government, and they don't make decisions very quickly. I have met with Elaine Chow. I have talked with several people on their staff. I've got my resume in all the right spots. So it's just a matter of them setting up the process for selecting that committee or that board,
Okay.
and then doing it. So I'm doing all the right things, but it's still a goal.
So I'm going to
Following up.
suggest that anybody who's listening to this podcast, if you don't know Renee real well, go listen to her podcast, go on her website, or just call her and talk to her. And then I want you to make a video and send it to her so she can attach it to her resume to these government people. It's just helping her get to her goals, and this audience should be willing to do that.
I do also have a personal sales goal for this year, and I have some workout goals. I go through Michael Hyatt's Best Year Ever curriculum every year and come up
Okay.
with goals and achieve most of those goals every year. The book that you're looking at on the screen right now was one of my goals for last year. It got written last year and published this year, and that was a big accomplishment for me. Starting a podcast last year was a big goal as well. So they keep getting bigger and better. And thank you for asking. I'd love to hear from you and hear what your goals are. And I think it's exciting for us to celebrate those with each other.
All right. I think we're done. I appreciate you giving us your time. I want you to know that as a male in this industry, I appreciate that everything that you do. And let's stay connected.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate you.
All right. I'm ending this event now.